So I've got to be honest with you guys, this might actually be my most boring rumination ever. See, there's only a couple of ways to look at a game like this. One is as a fan of Batman in general, the comics, the movies, the television show, the animated series, all that fun stuff. In which case, most of what I'm going to sound is going to be like, duh. Because a lot of what this game does very, very well is, in my opinion, of course, capture the essence of what the character and characters are, and actually does a good job of those. So, the other possibility is you're going to hear me saying a bunch of stuff that other people already said. This is a fairly universally praised game, and I praise it too, before you think I'm just going to be contrarian for the sake of contrarianism. But the problem with that is that I'm just going to be praising it just like everyone else did. Even Yahtzee praised this game, and he hates everything that has anything in it that's actually good or fun or interesting. So, Now, so I wanted to start with that because I don't know if this is really going to be something that you're going to enjoy watching. I do have notes. I have 2 pages of notes, actually. We'll see where we go with this. I do want to mention one other thing before we really get started, and that's the fact that there's a little bit of historical significance to this game for me, because I actually played Batman Arkham Asylum for about 10 minutes. Way, way back. Literally, it was one of the first games I tried to stream. Back when I first got OBS, first signed up a Twitch account, first started streaming this and one other game, World of Warcraft, actually, were the 2 games I was testing. I don't know if any of you even remember that. That was a very long time ago at this point. But it was going very badly because at the time I hadn't quite figured out my stream settings and my computer setup and all that fun stuff. And I haven't actually played it since then. This is the first time I have actually played through the entire game in its entirety. Although I do want to say one weird thing. It was weird going to this game because I've actually played City. Now, not all of City. I haven't beaten City, but I've played a decent chunk of City. And in my honest opinion, in terms of pure gameplay, City is actually superior, at least from what I played. So it was kind of weird coming down to this one, but it's not to say it's a bad game. Now, let me go ahead and say the obvious stuff first. This is made by a few... So there's this group called Argonaut Games, and if you looked at their list of games they worked on, your response would probably be something along the lines of, what's that? The thing I found interesting is they did work on the FX chip games back in the SNES era, both Star Fox and Stunt Racer, whatever it was called, Stunt Racer FX, something like that. Both of those were using the new chip in the SNES, and they did some coding work on the side with that. Makes me wonder if they were just starting to work on the 3D thing or what. They were apparently inspired by 3 games in particular when it came to making this game: BioShock, Zelda, and Metroid. And really, if you look at Arkham Asylum, especially Arkham City as well, but Arkham Asylum in particular, all of those influences are obvious. You've got a lot of environmental audio, great audio design in general, lots of atmosphere, lots of quiet horror, lots of mixed fun, lots of great scenes and great moments. A fairly cohesive overall arc, even though it's kind of a bouncing arc. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. You've got the audio logs and stuff like that. You've got kind of multiple gadgetry to solve your way through a situation, non-linear kind of a thing. And of course, you've got a pseudo-Metroidy, you get more gadgets as time goes on, which unlocks more areas, kind of a way to ensure progression. And some built-in sequence breaks, which most of which, not all of which, but most of which the game is actually planned for and will actually change accordingly in order to accommodate. I also was thinking about something else when I started playing this game. It got me on a weird tangent. See, forgive me. Pax and I were talking about Star Wars games and how there are some good Star Wars games and there's some great Star Wars games, but when you really think about it, Star Wars gaming is a very untapped resource. There's a huge variety of types of games we could have, different genres or different explorations of existing genres in Star Wars that haven't been touched. And I've commented on my show recently, actually, that I fear that we're going to be in for a long haul of that continuing to be true now that EA has exclusive rights to Star Wars games. But I feel the same way about a lot of franchises, and Batman's on that list too. It's so funny having so recently gone through several Batman games like Thief and Dishonored 2. Now, you could argue the Where's and the Why Force, but in my honest opinion, all those games really do qualify as Batman-style games. You are an elite individual who has the capacity to be lethal or non-lethal, depending on their particular preference in the moment. You're really, really good. You've got lots of gadgets. You've got an area to go through, and you have to go through in whatever method you choose to. Very dynamic gameplay. You feel... What I felt most of all when I was going through Dishonored and Dishonored 2 was I felt like I was playing Batman as I envision him. Then going to this game, it's like, oh, hey, it's a Batman game. Now, but I started thinking about it. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts if you could think of any others. But the last Batman game prior to Asylum that I thought was actually really good was the NES one. Just Batman on the NES. The really, really hard one with the... If you don't know what this means, don't worry about it. If you do, high five up top. Now, and it really struck me as weird that we just don't have Batman games like that. Anyways, so this is a new setting, new canon, if you will. It's its own canon. The trilogy, you heard me, the trilogy of the Arkham games all form one cohesive canon, one separate setting from the rest of Batman. But it does pull a lot of influence from many different other works, most notably and most obviously the animated series, but also some stuff from the Nolan films and a little bit here and there from a few other tidbits and bit pieces, as well as Tim Burton's era, for example. But all of that really leads itself to a game that... I know this is going to sound horrible, and I know I'm going to lose a lot of points with some of my comic book fans for this, but I think this is one of the most definitive examples of Batman and the Batman mythos, the Batman setting that I've ever seen. When I picture the Joker, granted I picture Mark Hamill in general when I picture the Joker, but when I picture the Joker, I tend to picture this one, the one from the Arkhams. When I picture Bruce, Batman, I tend to picture the one from... You get where I'm going with this. It's kind of become, especially having gone through Asylum now and actually played through it instead of just watching it. I've watched the whole game before. It feels the most Batman to me personally. Most of what I enjoy most about the setting and the franchise and the characters and all that fun stuff. And it is a wonderful mix of ridiculously comic book. I mean, there's a giant plant monster and something that can literally make you... Your skin and muscles distort and turn you into super mutant and then turn you right back. But it's also very grounded, despite that. Despite the fact that we have the Titan and certain super mutant kind of things, most of the people are just people, and everything's very down to earth, as it should, in my opinion, be for Batman. And we've got a lot of the more... I don't want to use the term gritty. That is such an overused term. But a lot of the more harsh and dark elements that are effective in something like Gotham. I'll be talking about a few of those as we go through this, that are very present here. And all of this is everywhere through the visual design and something I just cannot praise enough, the voice acting. Well, the random NPCs are not that great. All of the main characters received absolutely fantastic voice acting, and including several rather well-known stars. I mentioned Mark Hamill. Of course, Mark Hamill is, in my opinion, the Joker. I know that's a contentious opinion. I know some people disagree, and that's totally cool. I've heard lots of people say, well, this is the Joker for me, or this is the Joker for me, it's Nicholson's the Joker for me, or Ledger's the Joker for me, or... Oh god, I suddenly can't think of his name. 70s Joker is the Joker for me. But, that's cool. We can all have our own opinions on it. But for me personally, Hamill has always been, and will always be, the Joker. And he nails it in this one. And of course, we got the same gentleman who played Bats back in animated series here to play him again. A few other recurring characters. Very, very good voice acting job. Really helped flesh things out. The writing, in line with what I mentioned earlier, the writing is very comic booky. A lot of the lines are exceptionally cliched. There's literally a "it's over, oh, but it's just begun" line in this game. But there's still a lot of weight to a lot of the writing. There's several sequences where Bats is just flat up corny or cheesy in his dialogue. But there's still a lot of... You could see this actually happening. Believability, basically, within the dialogue. I'll never forget, there's this one sequence where you're sneaking up on a guard and he's on the phone with Joker. And Joker is telling him, you failed me, basically. I'm going to summarize. You failed me, you screwed up, so I'm going to screw you up. And the guy's like, no, please, anything, I'll beg you. And he's like, okay, fine. I'll just have someone go around and break both of your wife's legs. And the guy reacts with horror. Like actual real, you could hear it in his voice, just, oh, no, please. And then the Joker's response, Hamill loses all humor. All notes of inflection leave his tone, and all that's left is this quiet menace. Are you rejecting my courtesy, or not, that's not the word he used. My mercy, I think, is the word he used, or leniency. But, are you rejecting my mercy? And just the menace in his tone. He's like, no, no, Joker, of course not. Wonderful. And then he just immediately goes back to his jocular tone. There's a lot of... I could see this actually happening in this one, which is far more so than I could say for some other Batman-related works I could talk about. The directing is fantastic. I do think they really used video gaming as a medium in this one. Obviously, this is kind of old news at this point. I mean, this game came out a while ago. But I do think Asylum was among the games that helped to contribute to video game as an art form moving forward. There's a lot of, you see this because it's what your character sees rather than it's what actually is happening kind of stuff in this game. And I'm not just talking about the extremely obvious Scarecrow sequences. That kind of thing happens all over the place. Although, while I'm on the subject, maybe this is just me, but I would have loved it if the laughing Joker teeth weren't real. I know that's a weird thing, but it would have just been so appropriate to me, especially in a game that is a lot about mind games, and its overall theme is about mind games and the interplay between Joker and Batman, if all of those teeth were never there. They were always just a hallucination by bats. By the way, I have a habit of calling them bats. I've had that habit for years and years, in case you're wondering. Of course, the one other thing they do and it's only really obvious in hindsight. I kind of have the advantage of having gone through some of City and watched all of City prior to this, because you could see the bits and pieces of how Strange was found, how Ra's al Ghul or Ra's al Ghul was involved, the Mad Hatter, his interactions and how they were relevant, and the overall lead up to what would eventually become the greater story in City and Night. Which, I actually have this point very end here. It's actually the last point on my notes, but I'm not going to talk about it last. I want to talk about it here because one thing this game does very, very well, as you're going through, certain cutscenes will happen, certain events will happen, and basically a flag will be changed in the code, and that flag will make it so that now there's the scar on Batman's armor, or now he's got some cuts on his cheek, or now he's got some frayed part of his thing. And as you go through, his outfit gets worse and worse and worse in shape. You don't see it much, but right at the end when he does the explosive gel on his arm, he's nursing his arm like it's injured, and the glove is like just ruined. You could see like an explosive just went off on the armor. So, appropriate, as it should look. But it's a nice, immediate, constant visual reminder of, A, the contiguousness of what's happening. You know that this is just one long night for Bats, that he has not actually had a chance to pause or break throughout the night. And there's several scenes right at the end, especially the first-person stuff, right when you reach the end with Joker, that really gets you across the idea that Bats is just exhausted by the end of this. And then he has to go stop the heist for Two-Face. But the reason I bring that up isn't just to show how awesome that was and how well done that visual design was, but also to showcase what I believe to be the greatest overall theme of this work, which is, it's just another day. Ultimately, all of this, and all of Joker's scheming, all this planning, and the plots that were piling up on top of other plots, I love the fact that there's so many points in this game where it's like, I have to deal with Crisis A, and as I'm on the way to deal with Crisis A, Crisis B literally interrupts, and now I have to go deal with Crisis B, and then Crisis C interrupts, then I deal with C, and then I deal with B, and then I go back to A. All these supervillains' plots just kind of piling up on each other, because none of them are really coordinating. And then you get to Joker, and blah, blah, you beat him in the end. Now, as we know from future works, this was not just another day. This actually was part of a overall grander scheme, which will lead into the greater plot of City and eventually Night. But this game alone, in a vacuum, is presented as, this is just another night for Bats. This is normal. This is every day for him. And I kind of like that and kind of dislike that at the same time. I like it because it's very true to the comics, and it's very true to Bats, and is a great way. It's probably the greatest sign of his character I've seen in this work, that he does this stuff regularly. But I don't like it because it's just like the comics. That's actually one of the reasons why I bowed out of comics after a while. Everything felt like just another day. I felt like there wasn't a lot of weight or significance to certain events. I prefer it when things happen that are more permanent, that have a long-lasting effect and change on the status quo. And City did that. I hate to keep bringing up City, but you get my point, right? Hopefully, maybe. Also, I just got a comment on Titan and how incredibly comic book sciencey it is. It's ridiculous. I actually laughed out loud when, at the end, Gordon's like, "Don't worry, all the people infected by Titan are returning to normal," and I'm just like, "What? Joker's ribs were coming out of his... just what?" So, I have a few thoughts kind of going through the game, and then I want to talk about the Scarecrow sections, and then I want to talk about the other big theme of the game. So, one thing I like is that Batman is fairly chummy with most of the guards. There's one line in the game that actually feels wrong. It's a woman who says, "Oh my god, I thought Batman was a myth." It's especially wrong since some of the preamble work leading up to Asylum actually established that she was personally saved by bats prior to this. But anyways, ignoring that. That one line is like the exception. Everyone else is like, "Oh, it's Batman." All the thugs know Batman. All the staff know Batman. All the guards know Batman. Some of them know him more personally. Some of them have worked with him before. And I'm not just talking about Gordon. I actually rather like that fact. It does two things. First of all, it helps to showcase the man, Batman, the individual, the one who, even though he's trying to be this big iconic person, or excuse me, this big iconic non-person is in fact a person, and these people still think of him, even though he's, the Batman, he's still someone they can talk to on the street and be like, "Hey, what's up?" and support. And a lot of the guards are, and I put the word here down very clearly, chummy. They're buds. I like that. The second reason I like that is because it establishes something that you don't really have to think about, but when you pause to think about it, it makes perfect sense. It establishes that, this is a new canon, right? This is not connected to the DCAU. It's not connected to the movies. It's not connected to the Nolan movies. It's not connected to the old show. It's not connected to any of the comic universes. It's by itself. And yet, with that movement, we see that this has been going on for a while. This is not early Batman. This is probably late Batman to be at the point where he is literally chummy with the guards. So this is old hat, and I like that. It's something that, bam, right off the bat, it gets across that. So then there's Sharp, Quincy Sharp, and his career plans. How wonderfully cynical. One of the things you'll notice as you're going through this game is that Arkham Asylum is a hellhole. But what I mean by that, it's something I'm actually reminded of was back in Dishonored when we were going through that. Because I mentioned as we were going through Dishonored that not all of the problems and difficulties and hellholishness of the city could have happened in the last few months just because of the new leadership, even though the game was trying to slant it to make you think that. Or rather, some of the characters in the game were trying to slant it to make you think that. It's very obvious that the world was a hellhole before the game started, before things went bad. Arkham Asylum's the same way. It's been one night. All these events happen over one night in this game, and yet you go through and you see this place is a rot-infested, poorly maintained, poorly upkept hellhole, which means it's always, or I shouldn't say always, but it's been that way since before the Joker took over. Now, obviously, he contributed to it in many different ways, but you get my point. And that all goes back to Quincy. After all, Quincy doesn't want to cure these people in the strictest sense of the word. He wants to advance his career. He wants to be the man who cured the Joker. And there's this big thing about how he wants that to be the gem on his political career and rise up to mayorship. He does actually become mayor before Arkham City. So grats, Quincy. But I mention it as well because it is probably one of the most classic, I would say even textbook examples of literary irony, that Sharp himself is insane. He actually has split personality disorder. He actually is someone who should be locked up in an asylum. And from what we've learned later, although we don't learn this in this game, but most of these people here were made much, much worse by being here, not better. But even within the confines of the game, you could tell this is not a place where people go to get better. So, I mentioned one thing that's... well, actually... oh, sorry. That's a note I'm supposed to talk about later. I want to give more praise. I have Mark Hamill praise listed 3 times on this page. One of the reasons I like Mark Hamill's Joker is he can do... he can do the clown. He could play the part of so-called insanity. I'll get to that later. But he can also do menacing. I kind of referenced that actually already. He can actually sound very menacing without really much change in his tone. All he does is alter the way he says the words, and his overall approach to his speaking gets a little slower and a little more precise, and you just suddenly feel like he's like the Joker is bouncing around, and then all of a sudden you've got his attention, and that's terrifying. It's very well done. The so I one thing about the Titan thing, I find it interesting, and they do more with this in City. I need to stop saying that. But I find it interesting that they introduced real superpowers into this one. Opinions vary on how bats should be best utilized in storytelling. Some people think he should be best kept way down low. You know, kind of like he was in the Nolan movies, for example. There was no superpowers. The closest thing to superpowers in the Nolan movies was the gas that Scarecrow invented. Then that's it. You know, that's very low tier. Some people think he should be, you know, way up here. The person who actually defeated Darkseid, or Darkseid, depending on who you ask. That's actually happened. You can look it up. Some people think he should be wherever and no restrictions. I've seen good stories across the gamut personally, but it is my opinion that he's best presented kind of in this range, not limited to the very bottom. I like the inclusion of superpowers, but if you're paying attention, all the superpowers he has to deal with are very low tier compared to, you know, DC in general or comics in general. Hell, even, you know, video games in general for that matter. So we see Croc, definitely superpower. There's a tiny little bit with Clayface, not much to say there. And we see Ivy, and of course the Titan formula. And this is basically the extent of superpowers within this game specifically. And I actually kind of like that, because they are superpowers. They are superhuman. They are above the norm, but they aren't that much above the norm. And this is important, Bats is still capable of dealing with them. Not because he's Batman, but because he knows what he's walking into. I have said many times that let me give you an example. Let's say in real life vampires exist. And let's say that vampires are weak to pepperoni pizza. I know that's weird, but that's kind of my point. It's something you would never expect. It's something you wouldn't think of. Now, if we knew that, if we mere mortal humans, much weaker and much more frail than the vampires, knew that, we would be armed, we would be prepared, we would have the ability to deal with them, even though we are mundanes. If we didn't know what the vampires were weak to, if we had no defense against them, if we didn't know how to deal with them, you see where I'm going with this? One of Batman's greatest strengths is information. His other greatest strength is his access to resources, the being wealthy superpower. But the combination of these two abilities means that he can walk up to someone who has a giant plant monster, or someone who can quite literally rip open metal bars to eat someone alive, and defeat them, because he knows what he's walking into. Now, that being said, I will have to say, the boss fights in this game were kind of not that interesting from a purely gameplay perspective. Again, I've played City before. I swear I'm going to stop bringing that up. But the reason I mentioned it here specifically is because I feel like Rocksteady figured out how to do a boss battle against a superpower, because Solomon Grundy. The Solomon Grundy fight, that's exactly what I was picturing, something like that, when I fought against Killer Croc. And if you pay attention, the whole game hypes up Killer Croc. Like, not continuously, but like right at the beginning. There's Croc, I'm right here, I'm Steve Blum, and I sound a lot like Ogren, and it was so weird hearing Ogren talk about eating people in like a perfectly Ogren voice. It just kind of kept weirding me out. But anyways, so, Croc's there, and then, oh my god, here he is again, and then here's him being mentioned again, and now we're going down there, and now it's Croc, and then it's like, it was a binary challenge when we fought Croc. If you succeed, you succeed. If you fail, you die instantly. Now that makes sense, because he's Killer Croc, but from a purely gameplay perspective, it wasn't that engaging. Similarly, the fight against Ivy felt not that fun. Like, when I first went up against Ivy, I'm like, all right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the triple hook. I'm going to grab that one thing and pull it down so it can't hit me with the... No, I can't use the hook. Okay, no problem. I'm going to get the explosive gel. I'm going to put it on the ground right where the plants are going to be digging into the ground, so when it digs down... No, I can't do that either. What can I do? I can fling batarangs. So the boss battles were a little disappointing. All the other boss battles are basically, here's a bunch of mooks, and also some Titan guys. Don't get me wrong. I love the standard combat. And there's some gameplay. I haven't even really talked about gameplay that much yet, but there's some gameplay stuff I really like in this game. But I felt the boss battles were lacking. But, but, I do like the fact that they added the superpower element to this game. That Ivy was someone who literally can control plants. That Croc was literally this giant monster, and so forth and so on. I liked that. I felt like it added to the mythos, if you will, the setting. A lot of corrupt people here. I did a little research. Apparently, this game came out not that long after Heath Ledger's Joker. It had the Dark Knight movie. I found that interesting because as I was going through the game, I kept being reminded of it. I'll talk a lot more about that later, but a lot of tonal things in this game really felt like they had been deliberately or indeliberately borrowed, from the Nolan trilogy. And I don't mean that as the Nolan duology, because 3 wasn't out yet. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it added to the flavor of the work overall. The audio logs were great. Each one is a beautiful insight into the villains. We get a lot of characterization. The writers of this game knew exactly how to write these villains. They really did. It's some of the most top-notch writing. In fact, it is the most top-notch writing in this game in particular. And those audio logs just shine in showing exactly their specific psychosis. Because you could look at most of the villains and just say, well, they're crazy or they're insane, and that'd be true. But each one has a particular slice of crazy. And it's very well done. I like that. I'm not going to comment on specifics because it's all good. It's all good stuff. Although, if you had to ask me my favorite, it'd probably be Crane's. Okay, yes. I'm studying, yep, taking notes. And it's Crane taking the notes, and then the guard's like, oh God, he knocked out the doctor. Quick, get him. And he's just like, ugh. Undergoing my research is very aggravating at the moment. There's a lot of plot exposition woven in. All of the seeds for what the overall plot is, the Titan formula and its usage and all that, are pretty much all over the place. I didn't notate every single individual point, but as you're going through, it's like there's someone mentioning Titan in the background, or Dr. Young talks about her new experiments. There's a lot of little details. You can tell they wrote this plot out before they went back and started doing the dialogue. Probably one of my favorite tiny little bits of foreshadowing is how Dr. Young insists on talking to Joker. Now that's kind of an insane and frankly crazy thing for a doctor to do unless they know Joker. Unless they've been working with Joker, willingly or unwillingly. It's a nice touch. There's my note. Note this Asylum is a junk. Keep well before the game. There's the Scarecrow stuff. So let's move on here. Ogren. He sounded like Ogren in this game. It was so weird. The Raving Ward was absolutely terrible. As we learned later, most of those people were actually people who didn't take to brainwashing, but even without knowing that, even moving the greater mythos aside, what I was always left the impression of is, well, we can't cure these people, but we can't kill them because we're humane, so we're going to lock them up in a cell and just let them rave and scream against each other. And, oh, by the way, the floor is electrified in case they happen to get out, or can be electrified. That was terrifying. Like, probably one of the most horrifying moments for me personally was when you first enter the ward and you can hear the din of them all raving and screaming against the echoing walls, and then you get closer and it just overwhelms you. It's horrifying. I mentioned the Solomon Grundy thing, the Killer Croc thing. So I had one more thing to talk about the Killer Croc thing. Obviously, I found the boss battle itself kind of disappointing. But one thing I liked a lot... As he's talking about, I'm going into the sewers to get Killer Croc, he just kind of pulls out his thing and starts putting a fairly larger than normal amount of the explosive goo on the ground. And after the cutscene's done, you can't detonate it. It won't let you. And then you go through the whole section, go down, dodge, go around here, don't get caught. It was fun in its own way, kind of boring, but still fun. But the best part was when you're coming to the end and, the cage clumps down and the Croc is coming chasing, and then you... so that he plummets into the hole you just created. I love that because that is so Batman. Not precognition, although it could be seen as that, but just preparation. Batman's like, okay, this is the only entrance or exit to the sewers. This is a breakable floor underneath me. I might need this later. His preparedness comes across in many ways in this game, actually. There's a lot of things he does that's clearly, yep, I know what I'm doing, and I know that I might need A or B later. The one I just listed is probably the most obvious one, but the one I actually enjoy the most is the fact that he has his own freaking bat cave on the island. Because why wouldn't he? It actually makes perfect sense. There's a couple of scenes that establish very clearly that despite the whole, oh, the island is on lockdown and no one can enter or leave, Batman could leave at any time if he wanted to. He literally has a plane just break into a window one time to give him some new supplies. He could leave whenever he wanted to. And I like that because it shows that Bats was in complete control of the entire situation, pretty much from the word go, mostly because he had always thought, well, what happens if someone tries to break out? What happens if someone takes over the asylum? That preparedness can be overwritten, and I've seen that overwritten in comics, but I still think it's one of his better features, and I still like it when it's well written, and I think it was well written in this case. So, let's talk about the gameplay really quick. Let's shift over there. So let's talk about the flaws. Now, I've heaped a lot of praise on this game, and I loved playing through it, but the cutscenes, the pre-rendered cutscenes, those are fine. And most of the more moving animated cutscenes, the ones where you're still in control while stuff's going on around you, that's fine. But every now and again there would be this weird shoulder-to-shoulder cutscene. I forget what the proper term is for that. It's a television term. Where you have a camera like at one person's shoulder looking this way, and then this person's shoulder looking that way. And you switch between the two cameras to show conversation. You can usually see the back of someone's head to indicate that they're there. It's a very common technique in television and in film, actually. I don't like it personally. And in film, usually whenever the person who's talking is talking, they're not actually talking to the actor that they're supposed to be talking to. They're talking to a stunt double or someone who just happens to have the same kind of hair. But that's not the point. The point is those scenes were boring and terrible in this game. Like, the voice acting was kind of subpar for most of those, and the lip syncing was not the greatest, but most importantly, it just completely interrupted the tone of the rest of the game. Most of the rest of the game felt like surfing a one cohesive perfect wave, going all the way through, right up to the end where you take off to go after Two-Face. All of that, from the very beginning to the very end, was one line, except every now and again it's like, someone just hits the brakes when you do these little cutscenes, like, oh, hang on. All the music, all the atmosphere, all of it it felt like it stopped for those scenes. And then, okay, it picks up again, and then it stops for the next scene. Hated that. And a lot of the NPC dialogue was just kind of, it's also very linear. Now, I've heard this game called a Metroid game. I don't actually agree. This is the last time I'll bring up City, I swear. But for me, City was far more of a Metroid game than this one was. It is very Zelda-y. It is definitely a very Zelda-y game, in a good way. Each particular area effectively forming a dungeon in Zelda terms and allowing you with, okay, now you have this item, and now you have this objective, make it happen. But for the most part, I felt very limited on what I could do. There were, God, I lost count of how many times when I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this and that and that and this, and I can't. It literally wouldn't let me. Most notably, you can only grapple onto very specific things from very specific angles. You can't jump off of certain things if it doesn't want you to. You can't glide over certain things or in a certain direction. There were several times where I felt I could just but I couldn't because the game wouldn't let me. And overall, the whole thing felt very, very on rails. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. The game was very clearly designed to be fairly linear, but I just don't think the Metroidvania, I should say, comparison is really apt. That's it. That's all the bad stuff I got. I love the rhythm gameplay. I know the story, it was going to be a rhythm game, blah, blah, blah. But I do love the rhythm combat. By the end, I was critting every single blow. No joke. My actual record was 42. I want to say this is just a few hours ago, so that's why I remember it. Yeah, I know, 42, right? But seriously, 42 crits in a row. Not a combo, crits. It was against some of the Titan things, and I just wanted to see how far I could keep going it. It was the thing where there's the Titan, one Titan, when he comes down the elevator shaft, and there's like 5, 6, 10 other guys. Crit, 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 crit. A lot of fun. I also love how this game gets across in gameplay something that Batman is very good at. Covering his screw-ups. Too many works, in my opinion, portray Batman as if he's unfallible, and I don't like that. Because he's not. He makes mistakes, he screws up, he gets tired. The whole point of the Nightfall storyline was that Batman was pushing himself way too hard. Of course, Bane had prompted him to that, but you get the point. And then that led to him not being at his optimal sufficiency, and he didn't see the trap coming, and he broke, right? I like Batman when he's flawed. So every time I got hit, even though, it's like, it didn't interrupt the flow, it still felt like Batman. And they did a good job of showing it so you could pretty much immediately recover from being hit. And in fact, the animations are even there. They actually bothered to animate like, and then roll around and then punch. Immediate counterattack, immediate getting back into it, because that's Batman. There was one time I accidentally, so I was trying to drop down just behind a guy, crouch, and do a stealth takedown, right? So I dropped down on his shoulders, and the guy's like, oh, what the heck? But he was so startled that I'm like, boom, quick, and then ground knockdown. Again, I went with it. It worked, but that's my point. It felt very Batman to be able to recover your mistakes like that. I love that. And I think the best way to explain how that works in gameplay terms is even though you can screw up, you are not penalized too hard for screwing up. Even when a Titan hits you on a charge attack, you can still actually recover from that as long as you're quick on your feet and actually do the double tap to get up out of it, which is what I kept doing. I don't even know if there's other ways to do that. But you could still recover from, big hit, okay, I'm back up. I like that. Detective mode, it was a little gimmicky, of course. It was hard not to overuse it for me. I have the exact same problem I had back in Dishonored with the vision mode. I kept using it constantly. I got into the habit of not using it about halfway through the game when I got a little more used to, okay, that type of wall is one I could break, that type of, there's the hatch I can go through, being more used to seeing things that are interactable in the environment. But early on I had detective mode on pretty much all the time. The upgrade system is odd, I think, because at first I thought it was about choosing your playstyle. But ultimately, even just playing through the game normally and not getting all the collectibles and not doing all the side stuff, I still had all but, I think, 4 or 5 of the upgrades by the end. But I do like how you can choose which upgrades you get in which order, because that does help you to grow in whatever form of combat you prefer, or playstyle you prefer. I actually got the armor first, which, in hindsight, was a mistake. I got that because early on I was having trouble where people would constantly hit me. I hadn't gotten to the beat, if you will, of the counterattacks yet. Having gone through it again, or having gone through it for the first time, I should say, playing it again, I'd probably get the combo things, like especially the one that gives you the extra powerful, if you time your attacks right, crit thing, which, as I mentioned, by the end I was getting pretty good at. But I do like the upgrade system, that it's there. I also like the fact that the experience you gain through your actions is basically health. I like that the game rewards you once a combat is concluded by saying, okay, here's how well you did, and you heal for that much. It's a nice little touch, and again, it's part of that flow thing. It encourages you to do well, and it encourages you to be thorough, and it rewards you for doing it. Let's see. I mentioned the Zelda thing. So I guess I only really have one more point here, and that's that there were a couple of rooms that were clearly designed to be, would you like to play as Batman? Here, play as Batman. The first I'll never forget. It was actually the big library area. A bunch of gargoyles up top. And I went through there a couple times like, this just isn't working. And it's mostly because I was still thinking in my Dishonored kind of mindset. And then I was like, well, hang on. Their stealth detection is terrible. I mean, no offense to the game, but the enemies in this game are blind. So it's like, okay, hang on. Knowing the limits. Remember what I said on my stream of Dishonored 2? Maybe you don't. The limits, understanding the exact rules of stealth gameplay is, in my opinion, one of the most important of the 3 tenets of making good stealth gameplay. Clearly defined rules. Very linear, very well set in stone. This is how you're detected. This is how you're not detected. Bam, bam. And once I understood those rules, it was like, oh, okay. So I knock out one guy, grapple away, even though in my mind I should be detected for doing that, but I wasn't, because I understood the rules now. And I'm like, okay. And the guards are like, oh my god, he's down. What do we do? Spread out and find him. Okay, so I grab the next guy. And I had fun listening to the good voice acting of the guards, the enemies, slowly getting more and more panicked and more terrified as you pick them apart bit by bit until only one of them is left on, still conscious, and then just dropping down and, hey! That was immensely satisfying. And everything about it was clearly designed to be like, here, play Batman for this room. There's a couple rooms like that. And I love, you got the X-ray scope, of course, so you can look and it's like, condition, relaxed. Condition, nervous. Condition, terrified! It's wonderful. And it's a lot of fun. And it even got funner. Because there's one last one towards the end, as you're going towards the lab, where they've put explosives on the gargoyles. So you can't do the gargoyle trick. But you could still do the trick. You just don't have easy mode anymore. I actually had so much fun in that room. I did it twice. No joke. Like right when I got to right when I was about to take out the last guy, I was like, hang on, restart from last checkpoint. I want to try a different method this time. Because last time I was just like, okay, I'm going to sneak over here and pop down the staircase and wait for the guy to go by looking for his buddy. There we go. A lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. It's probably my favorite aspect of the gameplay right there. A couple more things to talk about. Let's talk about the thing that everyone talks about, Scarecrow. Obvious praise of the Scarecrow sections. I mean, I feel like that's almost saying, duh, water is wet. But seriously, the Scarecrow sections were really good. I know everyone else has said that too. What do you want from me? Lots and lots and lots of real-world layering in the hallucinations. For example, if you try to identify the random guard who you think is Gordon, it's like, I don't know who this is. And there's a few other little tidbits, like trying to call Oracle and failing at it. Little bits here and there in each of the sections that show the fragment of the actual reality you're in addition to the massive hallucination that Bats is currently undergoing. Now, I do think in many ways this was something of a trendsetter. The idea of the altered reality from the perspective of the player character thing. I also would also say that Bats himself gets almost no characterization in this game, and that makes sense. Someone once said, Yahtzee actually once said, that Batman is usually the most boring character anything is in. And I tend to agree with that, for the most part. I don't mean Batman himself as a boring character. I mean, for the most part, Batman is written as a broody misery guts who doesn't really have a lot of characterization to it. But in the Scarecrow sequences, Bruce gets a fair amount of characterization. I'll never forget the gentleman who actually says, oh, why should I worry about that kid? He's got a butler coming to pick him up. A butler. Pfft, he'll be fine. Dead parents. Whoop-de-doo. Bruce himself doesn't say much during those sections, but he doesn't need to. We learn a lot about Bruce and Bats during those sections. And again, a lot of this is very obvious, so I'm not going to cover every single detail, but couple of things. First of all, in the first one, you see there's the storm, there's rain, there's rubble, and there's no one else. There's no other person there. Just the Scarecrow thing, which I'll talk about in a moment. Imagine how alone Bruce really feels, which is very ironic when you think about it, but I'll cover that last. He must feel constantly like he is the only one doing his particular crusade. He must constantly feel like he can't let anyone in. He can't trust anyone. He can't embrace anyone. I also really like the fact that the thing that breaks him out of each of the nightmare sequences is the bat signal. Again, this is probably really obvious, so forgive me for saying it, but of course the bat signal is indicative, visual representation of how he breaks himself, uses his mental discipline in order to break out of it, because that's the only thing that broke him out of the last horrible tragedy he went under, remember? The only thing that adds any clarity or purpose to Bruce Wayne's life is Batman. I mentioned the teeth thing here. So the second one, personally, I would say the second Scarecrow section is, in my opinion, the best Batman and origin story I've ever seen. What I mean by that is we've seen, the origin story of Batman a dozen times at this point. The alleyway and the gunshot and all that stuff. We've seen that done in movies. We've seen it done in comics. We've seen it done in the shows. We've seen that done in other movies and other movies and other movies. We've seen it a lot, is what I'm trying to say. This is, in my opinion, the best presentation of it. Basically, what we're seeing is an elongated representation of Bruce's own memories of the event. So we see the things that were significant to him, the character, and thus what we are seeing is his character, more or less directly refracted through his memories. We see the long, cold hallway. We see sheaf after sheaf of papers, all of which are labeled with the same word in big, bright red letters. Insane. We hear the guard I just mentioned, the police officer, mocking him in the background. We hear Gordon in his calm and soothing voice. We see all of that presentation. There's so many other little details. I'm not going to go out. The audio design was amazing. And we can see what Bruce went through that night. I also like how the Scarecrow sections literally shift to effectively 2D platforming. Some people probably don't even notice this because it's the same engine, but with the way the controls are ripped away from you, you're basically playing a Mario game, or you're trying not to be caught by a boo, effectively. But I don't mean that as a negative thing. That genre shift is important because it's something that we're not supposed to think about, but we're supposed to acknowledge somewhere in our head that things are different now. That now it's not the same as it was. Because it isn't. Because this is not actually happening. This is literally a visual gameplay representation of what Bruce is going through inside Bats. And I like that. I also like the skeletons a lot. First of all, I mean, some people have asked, why skeletons? Well, the answer came to me immediately. If anybody else has any other interpretations, feel free to share. My interpretation was, how many dead does Batman feel guilty for? How much death does he personally believe is on his hands for his actions over the years? Remember, this is Bats well into his career, not at the beginning. Joker has already escaped more than once at this point. Also, I think this is the only other game, aside from Final Fantasy VI, which I've ever praised for being a game where you quite literally fight someone's inner demons. The interface screw is kind of obvious in its own right, but I think that's when we see Batman's real fear, or Bruce's real fear, or both, if you care to think of it that way. The first one we see, oh God, things are horrible. The second one, and he's failed. The second one you see about his origin and how he, lost his parents and is alone in the world. But the third one, I think the third one really cuts to the heart of the matter. Batman is afraid of being just like his enemies. Of being insane or crazy or mad. Afraid of the fact that, I know it sounds cliche, but that he's just as bad as the Joker. That some other people externally might look at that and say, well, that's ridiculous, of course he isn't. And some people externally might look at that and say, well, of course he is. But Bruce, or Bats, looks at himself and he doubts. That's the word right there. That's what I want. It's not really fear in the strictest sense of the word. It's his doubt. Am I doing the right thing? Is this the proper path? And that uncertainty, if it is. And that's actually a recurring theme throughout all three of the Arkham stories, for that matter. Finally, one last point, again, obvious, but it's interesting to me how the only way to really to succeed in the visual representation of the internal fighting against the gas is to prevent Batman from being dragged into the light. Scarecrow's eye beams are big, obvious, shaky, and very bright. And the only way to succeed at that is to stay in the shadows. The only way for Bruce to stay sane is to remain Batman. Keep the mask on. Final thoughts. There's some great stuff with the Joker in this. And I want to ask a question. This question, is actually a little more relevant in the second game, but it's still relevant in the first one. Is this Joker, the Arkham Joker, insane? Now, I know most people are going to automatically be like, that's a stupid freaking question, Lore. Why would you even ask that? But seriously, the more I played through it, and there's a lot of little chatter from the guards and the way Joker himself talks, it is my opinion, it is my perspective that he's actually not insane. He plays the clown because it's fun. There's a line by Harley Quinn where he's like, oh, why do I do what the things I do? And Harley says, well, you do it because you like the attention. You do it because you want to be on the spotlight. You do it because it's fun. And Joker says, wow, nobody else has ever got me like that. I don't think the Joker's insane. I don't think he has a warped and twisted mind that is ruined and his thoughts literally don't think the same way other people do. I think he plays that, but I think he is a very sane, very rational, very intelligent individual who just has his plans. Now, he's very evil, but ironically, if I am right, it would make him more evil, because there's no insanity excuse there. He does what he does because it's fun. And I can't help but point out that I have the exact same opinion of Heath Ledger's Joker. The one that came out just before this one. Anyways. So that leads to my final note. The Joker, I mentioned that scene where he threatens the gentleman and basically says, I'm going to break both of your wife's legs as a kindness. The question is often asked, why doesn't someone just shoot the Joker? Now, there's a lot of layers to that argument. I don't want to get into that discussion right here. But I think the relevant point is, why do his henchmen follow him when he's kind of a bastard? And I think that's probably one of the best things about the Arkham setting in general, because it really nails how messed up Gotham is. Joker cannot exist in a vacuum. If the Joker had no gang, no one willing to follow him, he would be nothing. He would be some weird guy that people would look at, and he might shoot a few people, and then he'd be locked away, and that would be the end of it. But he has an army, arguably armies of people who follow him. As is revealed in the third game, forgive me for skipping ahead, Joker has been playing all the other major gangs and criminal leaders and crime bosses and supervillains against each other for years, just to make sure no one challenges his position at the top. He can't do that in a vacuum. The Joker cannot operate in a vacuum. Most of the villains of this game cannot operate in a vacuum. They need their thugs. They need their people. City hits on this point a lot stronger, but it's very important in this one because we see how Joker maintains his control. See, some people would argue that making sure that all of your people are constantly afraid of you is a terrible way to maintain power. I would agree with that point. But that's not what the Joker does. He certainly makes a lot of his people afraid of him, but if you're paying attention, most of the people who he keeps afraid of him are the sane ones. The ones who are actually kind of more right in the head than the others. You know? He keeps the rest of his constituents happy because they're the crazy ones. The ones who are actually crazy, actually insane, or bloodthirsty, or just terrible. He keeps his people happy, and then he terrifies the rest. But that's relevant because Batman is kind of the same way. I don't mean in the sense that he terrifies his people. That's not what I mean at all. I mean Batman cannot exist in a vacuum. Bruce cannot exist. The two cannot exist in a vacuum. There is no Batman if he does not have his support structure. And I think that's probably the single strongest overarching theme of the entire work. That if Bats did not have the support of the guards of Arkham City and the GCPD and Barbara and Gordon, I tried to mix Gordon and Barbara there because I was screwing up the words. If he did not have all this support, if he didn't have Alfred, if he didn't have his tech, if he didn't have his money backing him, and all the people that are backing that company, Batman cannot exist in a vacuum. Batman, by himself, alone, with a chisel, did not go make that Batcave. He had people do it. He arranged for it. He has money. He has access. He has resources. It's fascinating to me because it showcases that in that case, Batman is not the superhero in the strictest sense of the word, so much as he is a regular guy who is capable enough of pretending to be a superhero because he has the support network to be one. And that's how he and the Joker and the other supervillains, most of them, not all of them, are alike. The Joker is not a supervillain. If you put Magneto and Joker in a room by themselves, and there's some metal nearby, and just here, whoever kills the other gets out. That's a foregone conclusion. Magneto wins. There's so many different others, actual supervillains, who would just crush the Joker like a bug if he was just the Joker. If he was just that one guy. But that's not what makes the Joker terrifying. It's all those people, all those corrupt, all the citizens who refuse to take up arms or to speak with their voice or with their money or their actions in order to defend themselves. It's all the criminals who are more than willing to do whatever is necessary in order to make another quick buck, in order to get forward without having to do anything. It's all the corruption in the actual government and the actual police and the actual judicial system that allows all of this to keep going. Remember, a literal two-personality insane man is going to be elected mayor of this city because all the people in it allow that to happen. And I love that because that is very Batman. Superman, I like Superman, but he can exist in a vacuum. He can be all on his own and still be Superman. If you took away all the support network of Batman, he wouldn't even be Bruce Wayne. See you around, guys.